Hey everyone, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. Hope you're doing well out there. In today's video, I wanted to just kind of do a quick off-the-cuff explainer video here to help you understand the difference between getting outside of your box, kind of neurologically speaking, which psychedelics often do for people, and healing your trauma. I want to explain how these are different and why that's really important to know the difference here. I think this is one of these things that, quite frankly, a lot of people are confused about and adds to the confusion in the conversation about psychedelics and trauma healing. And so I want to just clarify my understanding of this because I think it'll be really useful for some of you out there. So please watch on. Okay, so like I said in the intro here, this is a kind of off-the-cuff video, just kind of unscripted, a little bit of a brain dump on my part, trying to convey what is actually probably a very important idea, and I probably should have scripted out, but yet here we are. So there is a pattern that I notice a lot online with people who are enthusiastically excited about having taken psychedelics. And there's often these claims, I've healed my trauma from, one mushroom trip, or I had a DMT experience and it healed my trauma, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to explain the difference and explain to you what I think is going on and the difference between, what I think is going on in a lot of these cases and real trauma healing, so that you have a bit of an understanding of what to expect and what the difference is. Because the hype is obviously very real around psychedelics right now. And I think there are so many different ways that psychedelics can be a healing presence and a healing force in our lives. They're not just a simple, one-dimensional tool the way a lot of other, like say, medications are, or supplements are, or, certain practices are, certain therapeutic approaches are. Psychedelics are very multifactorial. They have a lot of different edges and capabilities and capacities and ways that they can benefit us or impact us. And so it can be a little more complex and confusing. And part of it also, if we're going to be honest here, and this is me kind of reaching into my past in neurolinguistic programming, or even going to, stuff like the Landmark Forum, is that there's a whole piece here of the role of language in understanding each other and understanding what kind of experiences we've gone through and what that is, right? So when we use words like trauma, and we use words like healed, and we use words like, transcended, changed, what each of us means when we say these words is kind of going to be unique to each one of us, right? And so the connotations behind these words can really vary a lot between people. That's really important to kind of point out here, because with the hype, and you see these people who are like, I took mushrooms once and I healed my trauma. What I'm kind of saying here is there's part of me that's skeptical of that and that doubts that, knowing what I know about trauma healing and what trauma is and how trauma is healed, right? So I doubt that. And what I think a big part of what's happening in this situations that we kind of need to put up front in the conversation before I explain kind of the deeper distinction here is that a lot of times this could be the function of fuzzy language, of unclear understandings of what trauma is, of what healing is, et cetera, right? So that's worth saying up front. But getting in my main point here, kind of, getting down to the nitty gritty, what I think is often happening is that one of the things psychedelics do for us is kind of shake us up a bit, in terms of, you could think of it as a brain set. You could think of it as a brain laxative, like you clear out all the cobwebs and all of a sudden your brain's all squeaky clean and clear. Or you could think of it the way, I often describe it is, getting outside the box, outside your neurological box that you've been stuck in your entire life, which is the way your nervous system normally operates and is normally patterned. The patterns of thinking, patterns of focus and attention, patterns of emotion, patterns of behavior, patterns of action, that is kind of the loop that you live your life through in your day in, day out lived experience, right? So everyone has, and obviously that pattern can change over time, but everyone has kind of a default mode that they live inside of that is kind of their neurological box, if you will, right? And for most of our lives, we don't even know we're in the box because you're in your body, you're in your nervous system 24/7. You don't know anything else, right? And generally speaking, if you're in a comfortable groove and you're living your life and you're doing you, there's not really a reason to get out of your neurological box, right? And so you don't know any different than how you normally experience reality, if that makes sense, right? So then enter, I would say drugs in general, if we're going to be really honest about this, but especially psychedelics, right? Enter psychedelics, right? And let's say in that default box that you live your life inside of, there is, a fair amount of suffering, stress, pain, unprocessed emotions, confusion about things, perhaps a bunch of old cultural conditioning that you haven't even identified isn't really yours, but is kind of sitting there inside of you. And all that's just kind of in the stew of your day-to-day lived experience, and you don't know any different, and you don't know how it feels to feel any other way than how you normally feel. Again, enter psychedelics, like I just said, and you take a psychedelic, right? And boom, it's like you radically step outside of your normal everyday experience, and you get to kind of look at it and evaluate it and go, holy shit, do I really believe that? Whoa, is that normally the emotions that I live my life through? Whoa, I don't feel that feeling that I always feel chronically that fucking sucks to feel, et cetera, right? And so all of a sudden you're outside the box of your normal nervous system functioning, and not only is there the contrast of like what you're not experiencing that you normally do, that's a revelation in and of itself, there's also perhaps a whole set of new feelings that come with getting outside the box. Maybe you feel free, maybe you feel energized, maybe you feel younger and more vital, maybe you feel wiser, maybe you feel kinder, maybe et cetera, et cetera. You start to get all these new resources and experience and emotions and insights that come online because you're not inside that box, which by definition has limitations and a shape to it that kind of hems you in from perhaps certain areas of insight or experience or learning. So that's often a very common thing that psychedelics do for people. And I would say that that's especially true, obviously, in the beginning if you're new to psychedelics, but I would say that that's true, throughout your life. It doesn't matter how many times you do psychedelics. I've been doing them for 30 years now. I've got hundreds and hundreds of experiences under my belt. It doesn't matter how much you do psychedelics. That will always be kind of a thing there. I mean, you get more used to and more familiar with, psychedelic state and certain experiences. But fundamentally, that thing of getting outside of your normal vantage point is always a feature of psychedelics, right? So that's, often, I think what's happening when people say they've healed their trauma from one experience and they know nothing about trauma healing, and they, perhaps don't even know what trauma is in any sort of detailed technical sense. They don't know, what it takes to heal trauma. They don't know what neurologically happens, the events in the neurobiology that make trauma healing possible. And, and these people have this experience where all of a sudden they feel better afterwards. They feel happier, they feel lighter, they feel open, they feel freer, right? I want to make the clear distinction that feeling better isn't necessarily the same thing as healing your trauma, okay? And that, a lot of times, I think what the people are describing is they got outside their neurological box. They realized inside of their normal neurological box, there's maybe a certain amount of low-level depression or low-level anxiety or dissatisfaction or confusion or overwhelm, and they're not feeling that because now they know that what it's like to not feel that. And it's like their nervous system has learned and upgraded a little bit. Oh, I don't have to feel that way, right? For a lot of people, that's a profound kind of relief, right? And I think that that's what these experiences are that people are often attributing as trauma healing. It's actually just a momentary experience of relief, of having some contrast from their ordinary lived experience. By contrast, trauma is a set of habituated, deep, generally unconscious, automatic pattern responses that we have based upon wounds that have happened to us, moments in life that were too much, too fast, generally where we, whether or not we were actually alone, we felt alone on the inside, and there was overwhelm, and our nervous system didn't know what to do with where we were at and didn't have the capacity to self-regulate ourselves through it, or have someone safe to help us through it and help us feel co-regulated through it. So our nervous system essentially automatically adapts, with one of a few different responses. One might be a fight or flight response, one might be a numbing out, a dissociation response, a freeze response, if you will. And trauma is this nervous system learning of, anything connected to that intense, overwhelming trigger, driving this response in us over and over and over. And obviously, traumatic experiences can be very intense for people, but sometimes they're also very subtle. It could be something as simple as being neglected a bit when we were children, maybe even just for a period of time, right? Or it could be something as simple as, we went to a new school at some point in childhood and it was overwhelming and we didn't adapt well and kids teased us. Something like that can be enough to create a trauma. Again, it's overwhelm, feeling alone, too much too fast, nervous system didn't know how to adapt and cope with it. And we end up with these traumatic imprints, and generally those traumatic imprints are robust. They are habitual, they're automatic, they are often unconscious. They often turn into things like whole ways of living life, or whole ways of adapting, or whole areas of our life that are shut down or under functioning, or hair trigger, we're over functioning, we're this kind of a thing, right? A lot of this ties into attachment theory and attachment wounding, and not being related to properly, not ever learning how to self-regulate properly, et cetera, et cetera. So trauma is a much more specific thing than feeling bad. Trauma is a much more unconscious, habituated, patterned behavioral thing, response thing. It's often very generalized across multiple kind of contexts of our life, right? So maybe I was traumatized from one thing in, point A, but it ends up in point, G, in a whole other area of my life, right? And generally speaking, trauma is pretty robust to, even if you have moments of really positive states and positive emotions and positive experiences, and even if you've had a big, beautiful psychedelic experience, that psychedelics can be used to heal trauma if you, again, connect things up in the right way, if you know what you're doing. But left to your own devices, generally speaking, psychedelics are likely to bring up trauma patterns and help you see them or feel them or get in touch with these currents of reactivity or numbness or dissociation or the other things that are common in trauma responses. But they often won't just fix it for you just by eating the psychedelic. I know a lot of people who have taken a lot of psychedelics who still have their trauma patterns, right? And so there's much more skill and much more intentional connecting to the trauma patterns in order to heal it, right? And so I really want to make this distinction for you guys and help you understand that there's a big difference between getting outside your box and feeling the relief from that and having a true trauma healing where you're undoing the trauma pattern so that it's just no longer a thing. The trigger's no longer there. You no longer have the fight or flight response to this normal situation that shouldn't create a fight or flight response, or you no longer dissociate, numb out, when, blah, 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 right? When someone says a certain word that you're like, why would that space me out? But you find yourself spacing out every time someone says it, that kind of a thing. So it's a different thing. And, and that's not to say that the kind of relief and the elation and the well-being and the joy is invalid. I want to be clear, I'm not saying that at all. It's super valid and it's beautiful and it's inspiring. And I always love seeing people feel more connected to themselves, feel more optimistic, feel more hope and more of a sense of, happiness and possibility. But the other side of the coin here, that if I'm going to be honest, why I'm bringing this up is I see a lot of people who confuse that relief for healing, and then they still have their trauma pattern, they still have their neuroses and their deeper issues, right? And or often this kind of chasing of this lightness and this relief becomes a form of spiritual bypassing. And you see this a lot in the spiritual community too. Yes, a little bit of a Freudian slip there. Spiritual community and the psychedelic community, where people really confuse feeling good for healing. And those aren't always the same thing. Yes, when you heal, generally you'll feel good afterwards. That's true. But just because you're feeling good doesn't mean you've actually rewired the thing or healed the thing or transformed the thing. And so this is a really important point to make, and hopefully this helps clarify the confusion. And I don't know if this video will be relevant to you, or maybe someone you know, or someone you see commenting on a Reddit sub or a forum somewhere online, a Facebook, whatever. But let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is this helpful? Does this open up some new insight for you? I'd love to see comments down below. If you made it this far through the video, I realize it's 15 minutes, a little longer than I expected it to be. Please, do a favor and give a thumbs up, help the channel grow. If you're not subscribed and you like the way I describe things and this might be relevant to you, please consider subscribing. Just generally honored to have you be a part of the conversation, and I hope you come back for more. So I'm going to wrap it there. Thank you for watching. I hope this is useful. This is one of these important clarifications I think a lot of people are a little fuzzy on, and I think it's really important to understand the difference here. I'm sure I'll be talking about it more, but anyways, thanks for watching for now, and it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you and offer these insights and my experience, and I'll be talking to you soon. I've got more content on the way. Take care. Much love.